welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us again today as we explore different topics in the life of the Catholic Church. And my name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as always, by Josh Sullivan over here.
Hello.
Josh, welcome to you.
Thank you.
And, of course, Matt Van Milligan on my right. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah?
Yeah.
You've been keeping well these days?
Yeah.
This is a good thing if people have been keeping well, because we know that we're in kind of tumultuous times right now, right? And not everyone is keeping well, unfortunately, because of what's going on. I mean, especially here in Canada, we kind of had our own sort of issues going on here in Canada
with the protests, and
sort of seem to be resolved, or at least
well, I think the news media moved on. I think that's what happened.
And then we have this devastating news about what's happening in the Ukraine now with and Russia and the Ukraine, and the whole world's kind of watching and praying, right? Which leads us to discuss a little bit about the situation, because where do we as Catholics fit in when there's war going on, when there's or at least the threat of war going on, right?
I think it's kind of cool, because as Catholics, our history is riddled with war, and whether sometimes it's what we consider a just war, whether it's considered whatever, but I like just a war. But as in the last century, let's say, we've really defined, the Catholic faith has really defined what it allows as a just war, what allows in war. Our Catechism kind of defines it now. It gives us precise guidelines, I think. And that's why you'll see a lot of times the Catholic Church doesn't weigh in on war quite often, meaning politically. Like, they don't come in and say, this side is good, this side's bad. Pope Francis just says, pray. Right now, pray for Ukraine, right? Because of the situation there.
Yeah, and for some people, that seems like a half measure to just say, and you have a lot of people responding to say, pray for Ukraine, pray for the situation. And a lot of people would question, like, okay, why can't we do more? Or like, what more can we do? Or like, what more fits with our theology? What more fits with our duty as Catholics? I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Break open.
Yeah, and actually, in an unprecedented move, I know that word has been overused during our time of COVID, but the Pope, he actually went to the Russian embassy, spent over half an hour there, which defied sort of protocols of what usually happens in these situations, right? I guess he just showed up there and he went to express his concern, really. And he went and met with the ambassador there at the Russian embassy and was trying to say, hey, that's enough here. So people were really interested in why the Pope did that, because it broke all of the the formal sort of procedures.
Yeah, expectations.
Well, because you have to also understand that it's like the Vatican is a sovereign nation, which then like has protocols in place specifically when they weigh in on certain topics. The Pope doing that kind of steps outside of what he's doing as the leader of that sovereign nation, So but at the same time, I respect him for the guts that takes just to know there's what is right and what is allowed, so.
Yes, and I know that he has said, whether it's, these are reports I'm reading on Twitter and things like that, right? That he's going to do, Pope Francis said that he's going to do whatever he can to help in this situation, of course. Right? So there is some general concern there, obviously, we're all concerned about what's going on. It's scary. Like you think of people in your own family, who may have gone through a war before. The thought, especially, and I'm gonna might sound like an old man right now, but you look like the young people in the young people in general, like teenagers and things like that, are really concerned about what's going on now, because now all of a sudden the world is getting serious. It's like where you didn't have concern about before. It's like war was something you learned in history books. Now things are getting serious. It's like, whoa, there's potential here for this to explode beyond what we can ever imagine.
Yeah, and we can say thanks be to God that war is so unfamiliar that it kind of catches us off guard like that. But I even remember, like, as a kid, like the fall of the Berlin Wall and even the Gulf War, those are in living memory.
Of course.
And a lot of what we're going to look at today is written by a lot of people who lived through the Second World War and a lot of the kind of East-West conflicts that are at play.
I love that the fact that like one of our both actually the last two popes, potentially three, but John Paul II and Pope Benedict, both the war had a very significant place in their lives, their life story, I should say. You know what I mean?
Right.
If anybody ever watches I think it was the movie Carol. I think was a real good,
fantastic
movie.
About John Paul II.
Yeah, it was a great movie, and that kind of just shows. For me, it opened up my eyes as to what the Pope's role in at the time. Sorry, the young man Carol, his role in the war was at that time as a young priest and everything. Like, it was a beautiful movie. So if you haven't watched that, that's a good movie to watch.
Yeah, and right now, we're so just before we get into, obviously we're going to talk about the church teaches about war and things like that. In the meantime, Ash Wednesday, which depends on when people are listening to this, has either passed or is still
today.
ongoing. Yeah. It is a day. It is normally a day of fasting and abstaining from meat. Pope Francis has asked that fasting be offered up for the Ukraine. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this after Ash Wednesday, still not too late to offer a day of fasting for the Ukraine. Also, there's obviously lots of people sending prayers and support and financial help to the Ukraine. And it really got me thinking about our Ukrainian Catholic brothers and sisters, because here in the city that we live in, we don't have a Ukrainian Catholic church. But across our diocese, there are Ukrainian Catholic churches. I know in Sudbury, there's St. Mary's Ukrainian Catholic Church, and funny enough, in Sault Ste. Maurice, also St. Mary's Ukrainian Catholic Church. But both communities have lovely people in them, good pastors, and I feel for them right now because we're talking about this as people overseas who are going through war. Some of our brothers and sisters in these communities have siblings, relatives that are still living in the Ukraine.
I think with this time too, it's going to be one of it's going to be one of the most well documented wars in all of history.
Yeah, and people are like posting, like as things are happening, you see TikTok videos of like things blowing up and
it's people coming up to a red light and then all of a sudden the red light blows up in front of them just because they have a car camera on or something like that. Like,
that's right.
Just making it very real for people. In maybe it's first world nation countries, you know what I mean, like that are oh wow, this could be us, you know what I mean? Like if this was happening in our country, you're driving a car and a bomb just blows up in front of you. What do you do?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
It is neat to see, but it's scary to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's scary that
I agree.
That we have that almost instant. It's like we're watching these things live.
I think it's going to bring the war very real to people back at home.
Yeah.
Where sometimes the horrors of a war can only be imagined, so.
All right. Well, let's get to the thick of things because people want to know, like, where do Catholics stand with this sort of stuff? Where does the Catholic Church stand with war?
I think the very first thing is the Church actually says that there is a place for war with some, like, the way that the Church tackles war is in the definition of peace, meaning the focus of the Church is that it should be peace, should be the center of our focus, what we're working towards. And if that means that war has to happen because of that, then there are some there's very specific guidelines that need to be followed in order to make it what's called a just war, or a war that is okay to fight in, or a war that is...
The Church has been around long enough that it existed when war was just a perennial reality of human culture and whatever. Like, and even if you go, back to the scripture, that Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. He also said, don't suppose that I've come to bring peace, but I've come to bring a sword. And he also says, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. But he also says, whoever lives by the sword dies by the sword. So like what Jesus means by we should pursue peace above all things gets a little complicated. And if you reach back even further into the Old Testament, like, the commandments, thou shalt not kill. But then you have in Ecclesiastes, you have, there's a time to, a time to save life and a time to kill. And you have these, they're different Hebrew words, of course, that one means actually murder. The other one is kill in the context of war. So, how we strive towards peace in a world that is kind of beset with conflict, that can get a bit complicated. And thankfully we have the Church to kind of unpack and set out very clear criteria, and thankfully a really high threshold for, when war is appropriate and what our place in that.
Yeah,
should
that's
be.
right. I like how you said that because the church has been around for so long. It has lived through many wars. But we were talking because I think people would be surprised that the church might say, "Well, war is okay," but I think it's in the where it says that war is okay.
Yeah.
And I know you had pointed us towards the Catechism of the Catholic Church just
right.
before we started, and number 2308 is very. If you're looking at your catechism at home, 2308 is very clear.
Yeah.
Right where war is okay, and here it says this. It says all citizens and all governments are obliged to work for the avoidance of war. Okay. However, here's the big however. As long as the danger of war persists and there is no international authority with the necessary competence and power, governments cannot be denied the right of lawful self-defense once all peace efforts have failed.
That's right.
And that has that just makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure. You don't start a war, and I think so. There's a couple of things that come out of that just in itself, right? If you're looking at it, a couple of the things that the church says for just war. Okay, the very first one is the war must be for a just cause. So in this case, it's saying for self-defense, meaning you don't have to just allow yourself to be overtaken by another country. You don't have to just allow your citizens to be killed or overpowered or whatever. You're allowed to do it for a just cause. You can't go into another country and just take it over for whatever reason, but for a just cause, it's allowed. Yeah. One of the other ones, though, the war must be lawfully declared by a lawful authority. And that's one of those things that I think it's not just, it just can't just be, well, we're going to war, and people just decide. It has to be by a lawful, the people, competent lawful authority, I think is the big words there.
That's right.
All right. So the other one, the intention behind the war must be good. And again, when we're saying the war itself, what we're saying is in the self-defense or in what we're saying here is not...
The objective must always be peace.
Exactly.
So automatically, just with those three criteria, you've eliminated almost every conflict or recent conflict in any invasive war, any war that's aimed at, claiming territory, anything that's not, solely in the interest of preserving peace, just doesn't meet that threshold, doesn't meet that criteria for what we would consider just war.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to get the other ones? Or
so my question here for you, and I'm just playing,
devil's advocate.
Advocate. So this, how does this correlate with the fifth commandment?
I think Matt kind of hit the nail on the head. There's two different words there. One is murder, and one is killing in war. One is murder in the sense of why are you murdering someone? I guess would be the Pope talked a lot about taking away the death penalty,
right?
Just in recent times, and there is no reason we should ever have to, especially nowadays. I mean, at one time the death penalty might have been allowed or okayed potentially, and if you couldn't store a dangerous person that was going to kill again, you couldn't store them safely, and you couldn't, maybe provide for their needs in a just right manner. I'm just spitballing off the top of my head.
And I think those were included in the modifications to the death penalty, that where incarceration is not possible and there's no other possibility of maintaining public safety. But the reason for eliminating was because incarceration is...
That's right. Yeah. I think we had talked about that on a previous episode.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
And that's where I say, so nowadays, we very rarely have reason for that to go forward.
Yeah.
We have jails that are set for that purpose and so on and so forth. But when it comes to war, again, avoidance of peace. So it even goes through and talks about so your military strategy must not be civilians. It must only be military or very strategic locations if you were going to attack. In again, pursuit of peace. And so taking the innocence away from the war, taking away the whole reason for this is to stop the violence. You know what I mean? Is to use, again, unfortunately, it seems contradictory, but to use violence to stop violence.
That's right.
Or to use force, maybe is the better word. To use force to overcome.
Yeah, and a proportional measured force, not excessive force, because that's one of the additional criteria that, if the force that's being used is actually going to cause more destruction or more loss of life,
Yeah.
then it's not proportional and it's not justified.
And the Catechism also teaches something really interesting about just because a war is going on doesn't mean that the moral law is thrown out the window.
No. Yeah.
You know, like it teaches, you know, that's just because, for example, that war is going on. It has lists of things like, for example, wounded soldiers are still to be treated humanely by all parties. It's like the church has outlined here some things about like how to act in war, which I think is really neat. You know, like sure, there's war going on, but that doesn't excuse ourselves from the moral law.
And,
right?
And more than that, the world is kind of taking note of this. Like, so the first kind of, I think, formal articulation of just war theory is Augustine, around like 4th century or early 5th century. And then, you know, Aquinas kind of refines it, and it's been this kind of ongoing aspect of the teaching of the church. But even you have the laws, the Geneva Convention laws,
right,
for, you know, armed conflict, you know, how non-combatants are to be treated. Or a lot of those are rooted in the just war theory of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool that the Catholic Church has that. I mean, when it comes to moral ground and authority, we like to kick the Catholic Church under, like, no one, like nowadays, it's my own moral law, it's my own justice. But then when it comes down to world law, it seems to always go back to, okay, well, let's go to the authorities or the church.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We'll take from them.
I think it goes back to like the really wise thing, you know, that Matt said, always full of wise things, Matt. But, you know, like the church has lived like longer than any other institution sort of thing, right? So it has some wisdom to say when it talks about these, like, you know, we were talking about the Catechism of the Catholic Church, you know, and it says like actions deliberately contrary to the law of nations and to its universal principles are crimes, as are the orders that command such action. So basically it's saying like blind obedience, right, does not suffice to excuse someone's actions, right? The people who carry them out. And it specifically says that the extermination of a people, a nation, an ethnic minority is always to be condemned as a mortal sin, you know? And it says one is morally bound to resist orders that command genocide, right? So I think that puts in context too, when we're talking about war, just war, you know, it's, and the church allows for these things when there's been an elimination of peace. You know, I'm thinking of obviously the Holocaust comes to mind, right? And the Rwandan genocides. Those aren't things that the church is saying like, well, if peace is the aim here, you know. So I just want to be clear about
the right intention. So one of the things I have here: acceptable reasons for going to war are a just cause, such as the stopping of an unjust aggressor, having the goal of restoring peace rather than seeking revenge, retaliation, or total destruction of an enemy without the possibility of surrender. Like if you're going to war just to murder, you know, like no, that's not the aim here. Again, is peace. One of the things it says here: the means used in war must be in proportion to the end that the war seeks to achieve.
Exactly.
And so you're not going in. I mean, so in a way, you might say that nuclear war never has a place. And I think actually it was Pope Francis or it was John Paul II. JP2 said that like nuclear war never has a place because you're killing the innocents that you're killing. Biological warfare doesn't have a place because again, you are killing multiple innocents and like you can't direct that fire. Whereas when you come in with precision attacks in military style, that's the way to do it because you can say, okay, these people, they're the combatants. We can kill them specifically and not a whole town, a whole city, a whole, you know.
Yeah. And that's the main argument for. So in, you know, living memory or in kind of recent years, people would say that World War II is probably the closest war to have met this really high threshold that you're fighting against naked aggression. You're working towards restoring, you know, world order. But, you know, with the dropping of nuclear weapons, that effectively ended the war, like in terms of, but arguably don't meet that criteria of proportionality. Yeah.
What is the rule for, let's just say, you know, me and you are sitting here in Ontario, Canada. War is breaking out. What is our role? What does the church say for us? You know, for us who sort of sit back and are watching from afar. Of course, obviously, we're praying for peace. I mean, that is very vital. But what should we be doing as people who see this war break out? We trust in the Lord, right, at all times, even during war. What are we called to do as Catholics here when war breaks out?
The Church talks about how if you have the power to obtain peace, if you have the power and the authority to force this peace, then you have actually a moral obligation to step forward and do so. Now it gets tricky because let's say if we were going to talk about Ukraine and Russia, I don't think we can at this time because there's so much background, so much history, so complex and complicated. But let's go back to World War II. World War II, there was an invading nation that was trying to take over the world and rid a very specific, what they were trying to do, their aims and goals obviously caused horror and terror and were not just. Yeah. In that case, Canada and Canadians had if they were able to go and help, then they should have gone and helped, and which is what a lot of our young men and women stepped up to the plate and did. And so there is that if you are able to, then go and do like you're supposed to. You're supposed to protect those that, I can't remember the exact wording. I'm trying to figure it out.
And I guess that you kind of see that going on right now. You see like world leaders who are in a position to try and impose some sort of sense into this war or to try and encourage peace, right? So they are stepping up. They are sort of sending aid. They're condemning what's going on. They're offering help. Then I guess next steps, if it gets worse, then we get to a situation where we have to start sending. Canada sends troops or whatever it might be. So I guess there are layers to it. But I see what you're saying. When people are in a situation to help, that there's a moral obligation to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the moral obligation. So and you can talk about it from a couple different. Do you have a moral obligation to go? So like that would come down to an individual's capability, the information they have available to them to gauge whether or not they're entering into a conflict that actually does meet this criteria or does actually have a possibility of a good outcome, because that's another one of the criteria.
There must be a reasonable chance of success is what the big,
Yeah, and also that that there's not the same kind of possibility for compromise. That if you have an indication that even though all these things are in place, that there's a good likelihood that you're going to be put in a position where you're asked to commit war crimes or you're asked to compromise your own. That person is not morally obligated to enter a combat situation or enter a conflict.
Right. Yeah. I know the document Pacem in Terris, out of Vatican II in 1963, John the 23rd had wrote, peace in our land, Pacem in Terris, right? That's the document. And he warns about the words of Pope Pius XII, Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during World War II, and he said that nothing is lost by peace, but everything may be lost by war.
Exactly.
And John the 23rd was breaking this down. He was saying that there's three motives that guide sort of nations to stay in unison with one another, and that is the principles of truth, justice, and sincere cooperation. Right? And when those things start to break down, then when there's truth. I mean, the document Pacem in Terris talks a lot about truth as a weapon in war, and he starts to talk about how, because even right now, with the Russia-Ukraine, the Russian people are told one thing about the Ukrainian people, sort of to get people on board. So John the 23rd was saying that truth is an element of war when those things break down. Also, because he was talking about propaganda 100%. And all these different things, right?
I think it's very important to realize too. And I was not condemned, but I was corrected, or my thought was corrected. Convicted is the right word. Yeah, convicted. I knew it started with a C.
I can read your mind.
Okay, convicted. But I was convicted when someone said, "Well, that's at least what we're hearing," and I was like, "Oh wow, yeah," because I'm hearing on the Ukraine war one very specific narrative, which. I think a lot of the world is hearing, but it is a very specific, directed narrative whereas in the people of Russia aren't necessarily hearing that same, so like not holding individuals accountable and realizing that it is a very specific narrative that's coming. So looking at the facts, looking at the truth, and we talked about that a little while ago. You have to look into truth and look into see exactly what it is, see who's spitting you the information and what their motive is. But first,
and that's why I said earlier, based on the information you have available to you, because even given the example of somebody enlisting in World War One, they're working with a news report that took 2 weeks to get to them, and they have to travel a week to enlist, and a lot is going on that they just don't have access to. They have to make the decision based on the limited information they have available to them, and to that degree they're either justified or culpable.
And when we talk about sins, and we've talked about this many times in the past, we're like, you're looking at, for mortal sins, let's say, you're looking at what's your intent, what's your, like all those types of things that come into the mortal sins. You have to have free will, you have to have all that kind of stuff. So this kind of comes into the play when you're in the plays of war, the playground, I guess. What exactly is, like, you don't want to kill this person necessarily. And it talks about firing squads and how, like, you have 10 people on a firing squad, but only 2 bullets hit. And yet you might have, what I mean? Like everybody aims just a little bit to the left kind of thing, or whatever that case may be. People don't want to kill other people, and they want to do as much as they can to not. But at the same time, there will come some potentially, especially in the face of war, that there might come a time where you do have to. Yeah. And do you have full authority, not full authority, do you have full willingness to not kill them? Meaning like they're going to kill you if you don't kill them. And maybe it's a sacrifice that you're willing to take, but otherwise, you can step forward and take a life.
And I just want to mention the effect of war, and I don't want to say this to be like poor us who are continents apart and still, but the effects of war drain all of society.
Oh yeah,
right. There's this anxiety that arrives in other countries, felt by other people. Just the fact that it's a reality. I'm not saying that. This situation just spurred fast all of a sudden.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, like, you look at the situation that's going on right now, and you think, like, one could think, like, as if we're living, like, as if today, in 2022, with all the beautiful things we have, as if we're living in a situation where this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this sort of just anxiety and drain that kind of fills every...
I think as humans, one of the things that we have as humans that other animals don't have is looking forward to the future. Something that we plan for, we look at, it spurs hope, but it also spurs fear sometimes. And it depends on which one we let that. If we have faith in God that we're going to be, that He's in control, then we can have more hope than fear. You know what I mean? So if you have fear over this, it's giving back your fear, your anxiety, as you're saying, back to God and being like, listen, God, like there's nothing I can do on this side. I can pray. And so I'm going to pray. I'm going to offer up my Ash Wednesday fasting and prayers for that. I'm going to pray every day for this. I'm going to offer up a rosary. I'm going to offer communion. We have the Eucharist is such a powerful offertory gift. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That when you offer up when you receive the Eucharist. But yeah, take it then to do the actions that you can. Right now, it's not possible for me to go over and fight in Ukraine necessarily, right? But it is possible for me to go and pray for them. It is possible for me to offer up my prayer time, and not to allow fear to reign in my heart because of it. True. Does that make sense?
This past Sunday at Mass, especially the part at Mass, where you say, "Deliver us, Lord, we pray from every evil, and graciously grant peace in our days." That especially was loud and clear for me.
Yeah.
Because of what's going on. And you're like, the Lord does grant peace. He does grant peace. I mean, the Lord is peace. He's the Prince of Peace. And so many people reject that. Yeah. Or so many people refuse it. So many people don't turn to the Lord in times of anxiety or worry, like you're saying, right? And then, after we say that part, because everyone says, "For the kingdom, the glory, the power is yours forever and ever, amen." And I wish we would stop to really understand the words that we say at Mass, because they carry weight. They remind us that the Lord is with us even in trying times, right? But the very next line, even though because we say these parts, we hear them all the time,
so it might be robotic almost sometimes, but to actually stop and think.
It's like, Lord Jesus Christ, who said to your apostles,
I
leave you, or peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Like, everything about Jesus is peace, right? Everything about him is peace. And so many times just in that part of the Mass, there in the communion rite of the Mass, we're reminded that Jesus is the peacemaker. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. And so many times we just take that for granted. But there is a correlation here. You know, if everyone believed that Jesus was granting us peace, has left us peace, has given it to, he said to the apostles, and accepted that in their life, we would be far away from situations that promote war or instigate war, and that's talking big wars, but it's also talking war. It's also talking the war in our hearts, the war in our families, the war in our communities, the war in our societies, whatever it might be, right? And because, you know, giant war like this one that we're talking about doesn't just start out of nowhere. It starts with the little wars that we face every day.
Yeah, and I think like it's worth noting too that a lot of times people want to have this discussion in the context of, okay, what am I justified in doing, or like justifying an existing war, an existing conflict, or their participation in it. When I think, you know, I think you're saying that peace is always the objective. That even the section of the Catechism that we're talking about, where you know just war theory is outlined, is called safeguarding peace. That's always the objective. That, you know, talking about what we can do, we can join our prayers with the Mass. We can join our prayers with everyone who wants to see a peaceful resolution to this particular conflict. But, you know, we have the example of the Pope doing the diplomatic work, and, you know, we have people who are actually trying to work towards a diplomatic solution that resolves the conflict before, you know, we have to get to the point of like, okay, what can we do like within the context of conflict?
Yeah. I think one of the things I think of when you were talking about all that too is a lot of times it seems like our only answer is war. Our only answer is like we're either going to fight this or we're not going to fight it. Like those are the two. But you remember that Jesus so many times in the Bible the Pharisees came up to Jesus and gave him only two very specific options, like pay Caesar or not pay Caesar, and they thought they're gonna get like, do you have to pay your taxes or not pay your taxes? You know, like, and then how Jesus got out of it with the wisdom of the Holy Spirit and everything else. So we just have to pray that wisdom is involved in the peacemaking decisions
and actually pray. You know, like you see people sharing on social media, pray for the Ukraine and pray for peace. But everyone just posts these pictures and no one prays, you know, like it becomes a hashtag, and it's like, no, please stop what you're doing and pray. Please offer a mass. Please offer your prayers, offer a rosary, fast.
Say a Hail Mary every time you see it in your social media.
Right? Like pray for peace and pray to the Prince of Peace to grant us his peace. This has been a good conversation because even I learned a lot about the wisdom of the church and talking about war. And hopefully we don't have to be talking about this again, and the peace will become a reality soon. Amen. Thanks for the conversation, and thanks for listening to or watching. To everyone at home, if you want, you can send us a message at the Catholic Buzz Podcast at gmail.com, or you can comment right on our YouTube channel or our Facebook or Instagram post. My name is Father Daniele. And for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, you've been watching or listening to The Catholic Buzz. We'll see you next time.